Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf chet. We are at the Mishnah at the top of daf chet, so we'll be able to jump pretty much right in, but let me share my screen and we'll get started. Um, Yesterday, or the first two Mishnayot in Masechet's Avodah Zarah, we have discussed the number of days before and around idolatrous holidays that a Jew should not engage in business with an idolater. Okay, exactly. Three is the way we end up saying. Three before, we actually don't follow the three after. So it's just three before, it seems like. As we pick up with the Mishnah, though, on Cherem and Aleph, the Gemara says, you know what? There are different kinds of holidays because there are sort of personal holidays, something when something good happens to you as a person. And then there are communal holidays. The communal holidays are the ones that we're talking about that are subject to the 3-day limit. But the personal holidays, a lesser restriction is going to apply, and the Mishnah will give us that detail. So let's dive in, and the Mishnah lists several types of holidays and details the rules for them. Here are some holidays that are for idol worshiping holidays: Kalenda, Ustarnura, Ukretisin, V'yom Genusya Shel Malcheihem, and the Genusya day of their kings. V'yom Haleda, the day that the king was born. V'yom Hamisa, the day that the king died. Divrei Rebbe Meir. So that is Rebbe Meir. Again, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what Kalenda, Saturnalia, and Kratesim are. But in any event, at the moment, we'll just say that those are different times of the year. We don't know even how many days. We'll see that some of them are not just a one-day holiday, but a longer holiday. But with respect to this last item, where Rebbe Meir says the day of the death of the king, the Chachamim say the Chachamim Omrim, they qualify it Kol Misa Sheyesh Ba Sreifa Yesh Ba Avodas Chachamim. If they're going to burn everything that the king owned, well, then that's sort of a signal that they viewed the king as a god. But if they viewed the king as just a regular human being who's their leader, if there was no burning of everything, that's not considered. It may be a holiday, it may be a day that they commemorate, but it's not really a holiday for idolatry. Okay.
Until the 19th century, burning could also have meant burnings at the stake of people who were alive, and those were big deal festivals.
They would
very often abused.
They would burn people alive on the death of the king.
No, it doesn't specifically say burning death of the king for the rabbis.
So no. The understanding is that the rabbis are definitely talking about where they're burning all the things. So if we take a look at Rashi helps us out here. So first, let's go back to the Yom Haleda just to confirm the Yom Haleda Shel Melech. We're talking about the birthday of the king. Osin Kol B'nei Malchuso. So everybody in the kingdom makes it a Yom Id, a holiday. So Mishana Lashana every year. Umakriv and Zachim. And they would offer sacrifices, and that's why it's considered a level of idolatry. Sreifa.
So the other problem with that is that Rome didn't have kings at the time of the Mishnah. They had emperors who were not styled as kings at all in Rome.
100%. It's actually interesting. For that reason, I think the Art Scroll has translated it as emperor, translated Melech as emperor. But I purposely sort of translated in the more traditional sense because I felt like I didn't want to use just their translation when most people would understand Melech as meaning a king. But it doesn't necessarily mean literally a king. It could be any kind of a supreme leader.
Steinsaltz actually does translate as kings.
Yeah. So Sreifa, so if we take a look at that now, this is to address your point, right? Kol misa sheyesh ba Sreifa, any death that has burning with it, shesarfu alav kli tashmisho kederach hamalachim, that they would burn their possessions as was the way of kings. So the point is that it's clear that, at least according to Rashi, he's definitely understanding the burning here to mean burning the king's possessions. So that's just a additional point that's worth noting. Okay, aval yom tiglacha zikano, but the day that somebody shaves his beard, uvelorito, and his velorit. So there's we'll go with Rashi's explanation. If we take a look at actually, well, let's take a look at both Rashis. First, it's the first of them is Al Yom Tegalachat Zikano, which is 1, 2 in the narrow lines down. It's 6, 9, 12, 14 or 15 lines down. Aval Yom Tegalachat Zikano Chulu She'ein Zman Kavu L'Rabim. They didn't have one day of the year where the community would shave its beard. But what would happen is that every day, whenever it was time for you to shave and to cut off your beard hair, so then you would make it like a holiday, because they didn't have, they weren't, shaving every day, and so as a result, when you shaved on a special occasion, you would make it a holiday. Ubeloriso, Kishemisaper pamim harbe meniach beloris meacharav. When you would get your regular haircuts, you would leave over the back of your head, basically a ponytail. Umegalcha mishana l'shana, and that ponytail you would cut on an annual basis. The Yom Shemigalcha Osa Yomid, and that day you would make a big party. I'm cutting my ponytail off. Come and watch. Okay. The Yom okay, so that was one set of categories, the shaving and haircuts. V'yom she'alabo min hayam, and when you come back from the sea. V'yom she'yatzam beis asurin, when you come out of prison. V'ovid kochavim she'asa mishta livno, and then a non-Jew, an idolater who makes a party for his son. The understanding here is a party for his son's marriage. Ein asur ella oso hayom, the oso ha'ish bilvad. For that kind of situation, then the only person that you're not allowed to do business with is the person who's celebrating the holiday, and the only time that you're not allowed to do business with him is on that day itself. Okay, so now we're going to go through. So the Gemara explains the two holidays mentioned first in the Mishnah, citing their origin story. So let's take a look. Amar of Chanan bar Rava, Kalenda Shmona Yamim Achar Tekufa. The Kalenda holiday is the 8 days after Tekufa. What is Tekufa? Tekufa is the shortest day of the year. It's the winter solstice. Sdarnura Shmona Yamim Livnei Tekufa. That Starnura was the 8-day holiday before the winter solstice. Simanach. So now what did we just say? We gave the first one that we gave was the one that celebrated after the holiday. The second one that we gave is the one that celebrated before the holiday. So how do I remember that Kalenda is the one after and Saturnura is the one before? Achor v'kedem tzartani. Because if we take a look at the pasuk in Tehillim, Kuf Lamed Tet, pasuk Hey, it says later and earlier you formed me. So the later, meaning the holiday that was after the solstice, is mentioned before the earlier. And so that's how we can remember, that's our reminder that that the Kalenda is the one that's after, Naria is the one that's before. So Tanarabanan. Now that on some level that doesn't fully answer the question of, well, why did we mention Kalenda before Saturnura? But that's going to be addressed by the story that we're about to tell. Tanarabanan. Here's the story of how those holidays began. Lafisha ra Adam Harishon Yom Misma'et Faholech. Adam Harishon saw that the days were getting shorter. Well, what was the first thing that he did? Before even the first Shabbos, he had already sinned with the Eitz Hadas. And so from the tree of knowledge and eating from the tree of knowledge. And so as a result, when he saw that the days were shortening, Amar, he said, Oily, woe is me. Shema bishvil shesarakti. Maybe it's because I sinned. Olam chashuv ba'adi. The world is darkening and I'm being punished. V'chozer l'sov avo. And everything is getting darker, and we're going to go back to the tov avo, the nothingness of the world that existed before I was created. V'zohi misa sheniknesa alai min hashemayim. And this is what God decreed for me, because Hashem says that you're going to die now.
So this is evidence that the world was created in Tishrei rather than Nisan.
Well, the Gemara is going to ask that exact question. So great point.
Okay.
But we are going to refute it. But it's a great point. I was thinking the same thing when I read it the first time as well. Amad v'yashiv shmona yamim b'tanis utfila. So he began to pray as the days were getting sufficiently short. It ended up that he was praying for 8 days. Maybe whenever he began praying, he prayed for 8 days, and then kevan shirat kufas teves v'ra yom shemarich v'holich, and then all of a sudden he saw, hey, the days are now getting longer. Amar minhago shalolamhu. This wasn't actually God's punishment for me. This is just nature. And so as a result, halach v'asa shmona yom tov. So he made 8 days of holiday. So the first holiday that was made was the Kalenda holiday. And so that's why Kalenda is mentioned first, because it was celebrated immediately after he realized that the days were not only going to get shorter, but they were going to get longer as well. But
that's also proof that God egg was in the northern hemisphere.
Yes. Oh, 100%. That's completely clear. Shloshana ha'acheres, although it's interesting that they don't answer that. That would have been a fascinating answer to say, well, that actually maybe Gan Eden was in the southern hemisphere, and so as a result, it can be in Nisan, but that's not going to be the answer. Anyway, L'shana acheres asan la'elu v'la elu yamim tovim. And so as a result, even though originally when he fasted the 8 days before the solstice, he was fasting and worried, he made those days into a holiday as well. So essentially we have, 17 or 16 days straight of holidays. So hu kva'am l'shem shemayim. Now, of course, he set them up to thank Hashem. V'heim kva'um l'shem avodas kol chavim. And of course, they ended up setting them up for the sake of idolatry. It's interesting that we never say that, that the 8 days of Hanukkah somehow correspond to either set of these 8 days, right? Because 8 days of Hanukkah can happen before the solstice, can happen after the solstice. So, but it certainly seems like they should be connected, especially given the fact that they're both 8 days. But in any event, so Bishlam now asking Charlie's question. Bishlam Lamanda Amr Bisishrei Nibra Olam. That all this makes a lot of sense according to the opinion that Tishrei was the month that the world was created. Yome Zute Chaza. Adam saw had not had seen the short days of winter, and that's all he had seen. Yome Aricha Akasi Lo Chaza. He never seen the long days of summer, so it never really would have occurred to him that actually things were going to get worse for him. And so that all makes sense that he would be very worried. But according to the opinion that says that the world was created in Nisan, and well, look, what happened? He had days getting longer and longer and longer, and then they started getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So just you might have thought that just as the days were getting longer and longer and then got shorter and shorter, so too they would get shorter and shorter and then get longer and longer. Meaning, why didn't he expect that it would turn around? So Dahavi Zute Kolehai Lochas. No, the point is that he began in Nisan. That's the middle of the year, and so as a result, he was seeing 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. But he had never seen when it would have less than 12 hours of daytime. So as a result, once he began seeing 12 hours of less than 12 hours of daytime, he was worried, hey, maybe this is going towards a world of nothingness. And so as a result, that was why he was concerned. And of course, he actually doesn't begin to fast until it gets much, much shorter, meaning although he might have been worried starting when it got shorter than his original day, but he really only began to fast at near the end when it was getting very, very short, when the daytime is like on the order of 8 or 9 hours. And so that explains it, that in fact, since he had never seen days get so short, he was worried that they were going to get shorter and shorter until they disappeared. Okay. So not necessarily the best answer, Charlie, but your question was addressed, is exactly that question. So Tana Rabbanan Yom Shenivrabo Adam Arishon. Now we have another brisa that is very similar to this brisa, but focuses just on the original day. That on the day that Adam Arishon was created, Kevan Shishaka Alav Chama, when the sun said, Amar, that woe is me because I have sinned. Olam chashuk ba'adi. The world is dark. V'yachzor olam l'sovavo. Maybe the whole world will go to nothingness. You know, it's interesting to think about this as I'm reading it now. Very, the rabbis clearly got into the minds of the ancients in this, and so you can understand where they clearly had. This tradition clearly has a sort of I get the sense that maybe it's a false sense, but I guess the sense that this was sort of not just something that we think about the ancients, but that they thought about the ancients. Maybe this is how I'm going to die. Adam Arishon says. So so he sat and fasted. Uvocha kol and he cried all night. Chava bocha connecto, and Chava, his wife, was crying with him. Kevan sha'ala amor shachar, but then Baruch Hashem, dawn came. Amar minago shalolam hulu, and so he realized that this is the way of the world. So Amad behikriv shor shekarnav kodmin lefarsosav. So as a result, he brought as a sacrifice an ox whose horns came before its hooves. So what does that mean? What does it mean to have horns that come before the hooves? Well, in general, hooves exist as soon as the animal is born, and horns grow later. But here, let's take a look at Rashi. It's the from the bottom of the narrow lines in Rashi. It's about 20 something lines up or so. Karnosav kodmos parsosav. De Amar Mar, as it said in Chulin, Kol Masa Bereshis, all of the created items and that were created, Bekoma San Nivra'u. They were all created fully formed. So Shor Im Karnav. When the ox was created, it was created with its horns, Migudalin, as if they had already grown. The Keban Shiyatza Rosho Trila. Well, and of course, how did they all came out of God, formed them all from the earth. When it came out of the earth, so it came out head first. So Nimsu Karnosav, Kodmos Leparsosav. And so as a result, its horns came out before its hooves. Whereas for every other ox that was ever born later, it came out hooves first, and only later grows its horns. Yeah. And so as a result, and how do I know this? Shenemar v'sitav la'Hashem mishur par makrin mafris. That as it stated, and this should be more pleasing before Hashem than the shor par, the combination of shor, which is a word that applies to all oxen, whatever their age, and par, which is bull, which only applies to an ox that gets a little older. As Rashi says with the next pasuk, v'seitiv la'Hashem mishor par, Amar David. This is, of course, a pasuk in Tehillim. This is from Tehillim, Perek Samech Tet, pasuk Lamed Gimel. Amar David. David says, "V'seitiv la'Hashem tefilasi," that my prayer should be preferred to God and more pleasing. Mishur should be yom shahaya shur shadahainu oto yom shenolad. That then the original than the ox given on the day that it was created, when it was originally created. Kediksiv, shor o kesef, right? That you give an ox or a sheep. So ox indicates that it was even when it was originally created. Hare asoy v'nigmar, and it was created, completed. Kippar, like a par, shehu ben shlosha, which is 3 years old. Shafilu mikarnav lo chasar, because even its horns were not missing. And so as a result, that's what David HaMelech is saying. And the point is that shows that there was one ox that in fact had its horns first. For Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. And here we have, this is a very unique moment. We're going to have a discussion of a unicorn. All right, so here it is. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Shor Shehikrav Adam Arishon, that ox that Adam Arishon offered, Karen Achas Haisa Lova Mitzcho. It only had one horn in its head. So although we often think of a unicorn as a horse with a horn, with one horn, this shows that really the first unicorn ever was an ox with one horn. This Shene'amar Visitav Lashem Mishor Par Makrin Mafris. And so again, this shor par was horned and hooved. So makrin. 1 second though, makrin tardi mashma. The word makrin, as we read it, is plural. So it suggests 2 horns, because when we use the word horned, it implies that it had both horns that it would ordinarily horn. So Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, no, mikeren ksiv, because it's written without any additional letters, we can express it as if it says from the horns. And so as a result, that, of a horn, so that suggests that it only had one horn. Okay. So now, having detailed the holiday, so the Gemara asks about the geographical application of the Mishnah's rules. Meaning, if a place specifically celebrates a holiday, clearly you can't do business with the idolaters that are in that place. Mm-hmm. But what happens if a place celebrates the holiday and they rule over a whole bunch of other places that don't celebrate the holiday? So that's what we're going to ask now. By Rav Masna, Romi she'asa, and this is the Mesoras Hashas changes the Amar to boy. So that's the basis for that comment. So boy Rav Masna, Romi she'asa kalenda, when you have Rome and they have their holiday of kalenda, v'chol ha'arot hasmuchos la mishtabdos la, and of course all the cities around it are, serve it. So osan ayaros asuros omutaros, those other cities which are not really celebrating kalenda, are they going to be considered forbidden or permitted? Can you do business with them? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar kalenda asur lekolhi. No, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that it's prohibited for everybody. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ein asura ela Avodah bilvad. No, all these holidays are only prohibited for those who actually worship. So Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yochanan, and we actually have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan. We are going to quote the whole brisa, but the first part of the brisa is all that we need in order to support this point. Even though we say that Rome creates kalenda, and all the other cities around it have to serve that Rome. But the entire prohibition of those who are of doing business on kalenda and the days before, that only applies with those who actually worship kalenda. So, and that, the god associated with kalenda. Saturnalia, Ukraitesin, and when it comes to those holidays, Genusia Shel Malchayen, and the Genusia of the kings, the Yom Shehumlach Bo Melech, and the day that the king was crowned, Lefanav Asur, before it is forbidden, Acharav Mutar, and after it is permitted. But Ovid Kochavim She'asa Mishta Livno, and when you have a non-Jew, an idolater have a party for his son, and again, usually a wedding, Ein Asur Ela Oz HaYom, it's just that day, V'Oz HaIsh, and that person. So again, very clear that this Brisa says exactly like Rabbi Yochanan, that it only applies to those who worship Kalenda. So Rav Ashi says, Avanan Nanami Tanino. We can actually derive it from our own Mishnah, a proof to Rabbi Yochanan. Tikatani, Yom Tiglachas Ryuso, B'Yom Sha'alabo Min Hayam, B'Yom Shiyatzabo Min Beis HaSurin, Ein Asar Ela Oso Yom Bilvad, Oso Aish. We say that all these things that are private holidays, again, when the person cuts his hair or shaves his beard or returns from the sea or released from prison, on all these days, it's only for that person himself and that day itself. So Bishlama Oso Ayom La Puke Lefanav Achrav. When it comes to the day itself, we understand why it needs to focus on the day itself, because I might have thought that maybe you would also prohibit the days that came before or the days that came after, because other opinions have said in the first two Mishnayos that it applies to the days before or it applies to the days after. Ela Oso Aish. But when it comes to the reference to that person, La Pukemai, what are we trying to exclude from that? What we must be trying to exclude, Lav La Puke Mushubadin, isn't it excluding those who are subservient to the person and yet don't celebrate the holiday and therefore should not be necessarily prohibited? Exactly. That's exactly what it's coming to teach us. So Shma Mina. So that is exactly right. And so that is what we're coming to exclude. And why might we have thought to include those people who are subservient? Well, Rashi helps us out. Second to last line, El Alav Lemute of the entire Rashi on Daf Chet Amud Aleph. El Alav Lemute Anashim Mishubadin Laoso Haish, meaning the people who are subservient to that person. Demutarin, that we're going to say that is going to be permitted. Delo Amrina, because we're not going to say Mandizovne Mamatule Lemiflach, that what's going to happen is that after the subservient person buys something from me, he's going to go show it to the person to whom he's subservient, and that person is therefore going to celebrate. So because we don't say that, we're going to say that it's okay to do business with people who are subservient to people who worship an idol, who worship and who don't worship that idol. So that has now supported us. And so, in fact, we seem to hold, like Rabbi Yochanan, that only those who worship the idol are subject to the prohibition associated with the idol's holidays. So, Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Yisrael shebechutz la'aretz, ovdei avodas kochavim b'tarahin. The people, so now, since the Mishnah referenced idolaters throwing a wedding party for their son, so the Gemara quotes a related brisa that highlights that actually something that we have to all be careful about. When Jews outside of Israel, it says we worship idols by accident. We might not intend to, but we do so. So what does that mean? So Ketzad, how does that happen? Oh, an idolater will make a wedding party for his son, and he'll invite all the Jews in the town. He's a good guy. This is not somebody that's oppressing us. He's a nice guy. We even like him. And yet, even though the Jews invited to this party are all eating their own food, and they're drinking their own drinks, and they've got the experienced waiters who know how to handle kosher stuff, handling all of their wait staff. It's as if they ate from the sacrifices of the dead. I can't help but read this and think of the Purim story and the fact that Achashverosh threw a party and the Jews went to do it, and it, on some level. Now, of course, that wasn't a party for his son's wedding, but the point is that it was an idolatrous party, and we had to be careful about what we do in going to that party. Shene'amar v'kara lecha v'achalnu mizivcho. That the pasuk says, this is in Shmot Perek Lamed Daled, that the non-Jew will invite you and you will eat from his sacrifice. And so, 1 second though, ve'ema ad de'achel, maybe you have to actually eat from his sacrifice. And you, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, said that we're talking about a situation where you ate your own food. So maybe it's only when you don't eat your own food. How do I know that if you eat your own food, it's also going to be problematic? So Amarava imkain nemra krab achalta vizmizivcho. No, the puzzle could have just said, and you're going to eat from their sacrifice. My vikaralacha. What does it mean that he's going to invite you? Why did it specifically have to reference that? Mishas kriya. It's meaning that the problem begins as soon as you accept the invitation. That's the problem. And you have to be very careful when we get invited to something. Is it going to be an appropriate thing that we want to, that is appropriate for us to be there, or is it not? So Hilkach, as we turn to Chet HaMavet, Kol Tlas and Yomin, for every 30 days after a wedding, Bain Amar Le Machmas Hilula, whether the idolater tells you it's because of the marriage, Bain Lo Amar Le Machmas Hilula, or if they don't say that it's because of the marriage, Asur. It is prohibited to attend because it's going to be a idolatrous celebration. Now, of course, this only applies to idolatry, but of course, then you have the question of what's considered idolatry. Is Christianity idolatry, etc.? So mikan ve'elach, from that day on, I amarle machmas hilula, if they say it's because of the marriage celebration, well then asur, then you're still not allowed to do it because you're participating in a potential idolatrous moment. The low, but if it's not, if he doesn't say that the party that he's throwing is because of that amarle machmas hilula, if he doesn't, if he doesn't say that it's because of that shari, well, then you can go to the party because you don't have to assume that the party is related to the wedding. But second, how long until, if he does say that it's for the wedding, how long do we apply this rule? Meaning, if 3 years later he says, oh, I want to throw another party for my kid's wedding, do we still say this rule? So Amar of Papa, no, atresar yarche shata, no, just for 12 months. And when, before the wedding, how soon do we say that it starts becoming prohibited if he throws a party before the wedding, an engagement party, so to speak? Amar Papa, Mishmei de Rabba, Miki Ramu Share Ba'asin say that as soon as he puts the barley into the vat, meaning as soon as he begins making the preparations for the wedding, that's when we're going to say that the any festival is going to be an idolatrous festival associated with the wedding. Ulbasar Tracer Yarke Shata Shari. 1 second. You're telling me that after 12 months it is permitted. 1 second. Vaharav Yitzchak Braid the Rav Marsharshia. Ikla Levei Hahu Ovid Kochavim. Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Masharshia, went to a particular idolater's home, Levasar Tracer Yarchashata, because it was after 12 months since the wedding for the son. Vishame de Ode, and then the guy heard him speak words of praise, of thanks to his God. Uperish v'lo, and so as a result, he left and he didn't participate. And so as a result, doesn't that show that even after 12 months, it's problematic? No. Shiny Rav Yitzchak, Braid the Rav Masharshia, the Adam Chashavhu, he's considered prominent. And so as a result, because of the prominence of the person, that's why, even though it's been a long time since the wedding, we're going to say that you shouldn't participate. But if otherwise, an ordinary person, the rest of us, since we're ordinary, we're going to say that it would be okay afterwards.
You send a gift and you thank them.
There you go. That's exactly. And you don't have to go.
You don't have to go.
100%. Our time is worth more than the party.
Send a gift.
It's not exactly like they're describing here, but on July 4th, 1788, there was a humongous ceremony in Philadelphia with like 3/4 of the city's population to celebrate the ratification of the Constitution.
Okay.
That included at least one float that had a depiction of the god Mercury, which eventually we'll hear is a problem in Masecta Avodah Zarah. But it also, a contemporary report, it was that the Jews had their own kosher food stand that they ate from.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. And of course, we know that the Jews participated in those celebrations because the New York celebration was postponed.
For the Shabbos.
No, it was postponed because of the fast day of Tisha B'Av.
Ah, I didn't know.
So
that. Right.
I'm pretty sure it was Tisha B'Av and not Shavas or B'Tammuz. But for one of the fast days, it was one of the summer fast days. It was postponed. And there's actually a paper that a colleague of mine at Wachtell Lipton wrote in connection with it. And so very fascinating historical event. Absolutely true that in fact. That was how important the Jews were to the New York community that they actually postponed the holiday, the celebration, in order to enable them to participate.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems to have been the case in Philadelphia too. People were the contemporary accounts are that the Jews were a big deal, even though the community wasn't huge. They in New York and Philadelphia, Jews have been a big deal for a while.
I think there were Jews in the first Dutch settlement in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me. All right. So what is next holiday? We've dealt with the first two holidays, but now we got to figure out what Kratesim is. Kratesim, that was a quote from our Mishnah. So my Kratesim, what is this Kratesim? So Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Yom Shetafsabo Romi Malchus. It's the day that Rome gained its self-rule, that it began, that it was no longer subservient. It gains its own sovereignty, and so that's the day that they celebrate. But Tanya, 1 second, we have a brisa that seems to suggest that that's not the same day as Kratesim, because Kratesim, the Yom Shetafsabo Romi Malchus, because we have a brisa that we're now excerpting a very small piece from, where it says that Kratesim and the day that Rome got its sovereignty are two separate holidays. There were two times that it gained its sovereignty. Cleopatra Malkata. The one time was when in the days of Queen Cleopatra. And then again, and then I think it was the earlier probably would have been the one against the Greeks. So Cleopatra, it says here, was probably in the very close to the Common Era, 31 BCE, and the one before that would have been 100 and some years BCE. So there were two situations where it gained its sovereignty, and so the Kiasa Rabdimi Amar. And along those lines, Rav Dimi shared the following historical lesson. Tlasin utrain krave avdu romae bahadi yavane. The Romans and the Greeks fought 32 battles. And I think you referenced, Charlie, this concept that we are about to see a few days ago. Below Yachlu, maybe it was even yesterday. Below Yachlu lahu ad tafinhu liyisrael ba'adayu. And the Romans weren't able to defeat the Greeks until they worked with the Jews. V'hochi asnu ba'adayu. And then when they set up the following agreement with them. Iminan malche, if we become the king, minaichu haparchi, well then you'll become the governor. Uminaichi malchi, and if you become the king, minan haparchi, we'll become the governor. V'shalchu lahu roma'ai yavanai, and so then the Romans sent to the Greeks the following message: Ad ha'idna avidna bekrava. Until now, we were in battle, doing physical battle with you. Hashta navid bedina. Now let's do some logic. Margalit the Evan Tova. You have a pearl and a more expensive, Rashi says, stone. Ezo mehen yasa besis lelichavero. Which one are you going to use as the base, as the setting, and which one are you going to use as the primary stone? So Shalchalahu, the Greeks responded, Margalis le'evan tova, the tova. The evan tova is the core, and so as a result, the pearl serves as the setting for the precious stone. Evan tova ve'enach. Well, 1 second. What about an evan tona and an anach? Is how the Masoras Hashas changes it. Ezo mehen yasa besis luchavero. Which one is a base for the other? So Evan Tona tova le'anach. Again, you're going to have the precious stone for the anach, which is translated, here, which could be is most likely an onyx. So Eina anach but Sefer Torah. What about an onyx and the Sefer Torah itself? Ezo mehen yazeh basis l'chavero. Which one is more important? Meaning, if you have a source of knowledge and a stone, which of course does not provide any knowledge, Einach l'Sefer Torah. Of course, the onyx serves the Torah scroll. So shalchalahu. So the Romans said, Im kain anon Sefer Torah gaban. We are like a Sefer Torah. We have the Sefer Torah with us. The Yisrael bahadan, because Israel is with us. So kafalu, and so as a result, the Romans went and forced them and were able to overcome the Greeks. Esrin v'shish shanin kamalahu behamanusaihu bahadi Yisrael. For 26 years, I wonder whether the 26 is associated with the gematria for Yud Kei Vav Kei of Hashem's name, but in any event, for 26 years, the Romans kept the deal. Mikan ve'elach ishtabdu lahabahu. But after 26 years, they then started subjugating the Jews, and of course, that's when problems really started for us. And that's why we call them, the Romi Harasha. So, but we'll see that in a moment. Mikara my Darish. So why in the world did they originally agree to partner with us? Ubasof my Darish. And then why in the world did they then change their mind and subjugate us? Mikara Darish, from the beginning they said, Nisa v'nelecha v'elcha v'lengdecha, that originally Esav offered, listen, why don't we travel together and I'll go with you? So Ubasov Darish, but then in the end, what did Yaakov say back? Yavar na adoni lifnei avdo. You, my master, go ahead of me. Meaning that the Jews have said from day one that we were going to let the Esav take the leadership role. Now, there's a number of different thoughts on this. One is there can be an aspect of the repentance associated with Yaakov taking the bracha from Esav. Because the bracha from Esav was the fact that Yaakov was supposed to rule over Esav. And of course, that's never really happened. And so as a result, we could say that really what this is saying is that, when Yaakov met up with Esav on his way back to Israel, then he effectively transferred the blessing in what we're saying here, that he's essentially saying, I don't want this. I don't want the guilt that's associated with my having taken your blessing. And so as a result, he's really saying that. That's at least one read that occurs to me as I think about it, because of course it's the whole story of Yaakov taking the blessing of Esav is very problematic to understand. Okay, in any event, the bottom line is that they originally fulfilled their agreement, but then they went ahead and subjugated us because they felt that we had agreed to be subjugated. Esrin v'shishnin dekamo behamanusaihu bahadi Yisrael minalan. How do we know that there were 26 years? Da'amaro kahana b'shechala Rabbi Yishmael bar Yossi. Well, we know that because of what Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said when he fell ill. Because the rabbis went to ask him, Rebbe, Amor lanu shnaimu shlosha dvarim she'amarta lanu mishum avicha. Tell us 2 or 3 things that were said, that you said to us in the name of your father. So Amar lahu, Meya ushmonim shana kodem shenech Rav Abayis, 180 years before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Pashta Malchus Harisha al Yisrael. So that is when the evil kingdom, namely Rome, as Rashi says, Malchus Romi, they began to rule over Israel. Pei Shana, meaning Shmonim Shana, ad lo charav Abayis. And then it was 80 years before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Gazru Tuma al Eretz Ha'amim v'al Klei Zchuchis. That was when the rabbi said that if you go outside the land of Israel, we're going to assume that you are tameh, and glassware, which is not covered by tuma and tara in the Torah, we're going to treat glassware as if it can become tameh as well. Arba'im shana or mem shana, it says ad locha Rav Abayis, but again 40 years before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Galsa Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, they exiled themselves. V'yasha la b'chanos, and they went and sat in Chanos. Now Chanos was not so far away, because Rashi says Makom Bahar Abayis b'Chanos Shmo. It was still on the Temple Mount. It just wasn't in the Lishkas Hagazis, which is where they were sitting. But in any event, the bottom line is that they moved their seat, and so as a result, we'll see what that matters. So Lamai Hilchasa, what's the implication of this? Meaning, how do we see that what does it matter that the Sanhedrin moved? So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abdimi, Lomar Shelo Dano Dine Knasos. No, it means that they didn't judge penalties any longer. Meaning there are a variety of kinds of fines, and if the Sanhedrin is not in its regular location, maybe that means that you can't judge those cases. Now we're going to spend the next few minutes showing that that's not right. So Dine Knaso Salka Daiduk, could it really be that they couldn't judge cases of my apologies for not scrolling. Could it really be that they could not judge penalty cases once the Sanhedrin moved? V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Baram Zachor LaOso Ha'ish L'Tov, that there's this person who should be remembered for good. Rav Yehuda ben Bava Shmo, and his name is Rav Yehuda ben Bava. And what did he do that he should be remembered for good? Shil Malehu Nishtalku Dine Kanasos Miyisrael, because without him, penalties would have been forgotten in the Jewish people. Now the Gemara quickly asked, Nishtaku, they would have been forgotten. Legarsinu, we could have just studied them and we wouldn't forget them. Ela Blatlu Dine Knasos Miyisrael. No, the implication of the implementation of the penalties would have been abolished. They would have no longer been able to be practiced. Why? Because we're going to see that, in fact, the application of penalties is dependent on their existing rabbis who have had smicha from somebody who himself got smicha. So Shegazra Malchus Harishal Exera, because the Rome had a decree, Kol Hasomech Yaharig, that anybody who confers a smicha is going to be killed. The Kol Hanismach Yaharig, and anybody who receives it will be killed. V'ir Shesomchimba Techarav, and the city where that smicha takes place is going to be destroyed. Utchumas Shesomchimbo Yaker, and the whole 2,000 amos around the city will be uprooted. Ma'asa Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do in order to ensure the continuation of smicha? Halach v'yashav ben shnei harim gdolim. He went and sat between two large mountains. Uvein shnei ayaros gedolos, and between two large cities. Uvein shnei tchumei Shabbos, and he made sure that he was outside the tchum Shabbos of all of them. Bein Usha l'Shfaram, between Usha and Shfaram. V'samach sham, and there he gave Chamisha Zakanim. He gave ordination to 5 rabbis: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. Rav Avya Mosif af Rabbi Nechemia, and Rav Avya says it was also Rabbi Nechemia was there. Kevan shekiru behem oivim amar lahem. So when they were discovered by the Romans, by the enemies, so Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said, Banai, Rutsu, go run. Amrulo, Rabbi, but what's going to happen to you, Rabbi? So Amar Lahem, he said to them, Hareini mutal lefneihem ke'eben she'ein la hofchen. I'm like a rock that can't be overturned. Don't worry about me. I'm not going to go anywhere. You run. So Amru lo zazu misham ad shenatzug legufo shlosh me'os lunuyos shel barzel, and they weren't done in that location until he was speared 300 times. Va'asauhu legufo kakvara, that his body became like a sieve. And so, and the point of all of this was that this happened well after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, as we said, right? Rashi points out V'samach sham. This is 4, 8, 12 lines up. V'hani Rabbanon Basar Churban Abayis Havu no Tuva. They were well after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So how can you say that before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, when the Sanhedrin moved, that was when we stopped giving penalties? This story shows that they gave penalties even thereafter. So Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, lo tema dine knasos. No, we didn't mean to say penalties. Ela shelo danu dine nefashos. No, we stopped judging capital cases. My timer, why did they stop judging capital cases? Meaning, why did they exile themselves from their original location? Because there were lots of murderers below Yachle Lameidan, and they weren't going to be able to judge them all. Amru mutav nigle mimakom lamakom ki hechi delo lichayvu. And so let's move so we won't become liable for having allowed these murderers to run free. Diksiva asisa al pi hadavar asher yagidu lecha min makom hahu. Because it says you'll do according to the word that they will tell you from that place. That it's specifically, and this is a pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Yud Zayin, pasuk Yud, Milamed Shamakom Gorim, that specifically that place being in, having the Sanhedrin in the Lishkas Agazis was key to their being able to have implement capital cases. And so as a result, that was why they really left. But we have not yet finished. We're sort of in the middle of this overall discussion because we are in the middle of essentially asking, how do we know that the Romans kept the deal for 26 years? We haven't quite answered that question. So if you want the answer to that question, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a fabulous, fabulous day.
Yes, same to you.
Dr. Cox.
Brooke Diet, looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Thank you, Rabbi.